Let's talk about a guy who did not suit up in the Super Bowl last night, but is probably the biggest reason why the Eagles won the Super Bowl. What a freaking job by Howie Roseman to build this roster, man. Oh my goodness. We talked about Cooper DeJean before, getting him in the second round, fixing that massive issue for the Eagles, getting guys like Quinyon Mitchell in there, having Jalen Carter fall into your lap later on in the draft, obviously for some off-the-field reasons as well, but getting a guy like Zach Bond, right? A guy that New Orleans cast off and said, we don't know what to do with him. Is he an edge rusher? Is he a linebacker? Who knows? Goes to Philadelphia, plays off-ball linebacker full-time, had a pick last night in the Super Bowl, was one of the best linebackers in football this year. Just Howie Roseman completely retooling this defense, signing Saquon Barkley, and having an unbelievable year for him as well. Getting Mekhi Becton to come in and play guard when he was a bust at tackle for the Jets. So many moves by Howie Roseman that just built this super team for Philadelphia. This is why they're the best team in football, and they proved it last night.
Yeah, I think, when you compare the first Super Bowl run back in 2017 to this one. That one was about drafting well for several years and obviously also building a great team in the trenches. And then Nick Foles kind of had the fairy tale run, right? We weren't sure if they were going to beat New England. Could Nick Foles really beat Tom Brady? And they found a way to get it done in the shootout, right? This one, to me, it starts, we have to go back to the transition from Carson Wentz to Jalen Hurts, right? Wentz had some injury issues. He struggled that last year in 2020.
Remember when Hurts was drafted, everyone was like, what are they doing?
Exactly.
Why? Yeah.
What are they doing? And I think at the quarterback position, and we've had a similar argument with Michael Penix Jr. this year with the Falcons, at that spot, if you think you have a guy that could be your guy, you have to take him. If you think he's of that caliber, you take him. And back then with Hurts, we were arguing about a mid-second round pick. Yeah. What the hell are they doing wasting pick 48 or 50 or whatever it was, right? It was like this big giant thing. It was, now what's the situation with Carson Wentz? And you look now 4 or 5 years later, and Howie Roseman knew exactly what he was doing.
And Wentz was backing up Mahomes in the Super Bowl.
And when you look at not just, they went and got Jalen Hurts, but we have to remember the trade of Carson Wentz to Indianapolis, all right? And for a quarterback who was coming off his worst season, had injury issues, and Hurts had made the last, I think it was 4 or 5 starts of that season, he gets a first and a third round pick for Carson Wentz from the Colts, right? Through a series of, if I counted right, it was 6 different trades. He turned Carson Wentz into A.J. Brown, Milton Williams, Jalen Carter, and Cooper DeJean. That's the Super Bowl team.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the core of it this year. That's what they've added since then. I mean, you look at the way he's flipped draft picks. He's traded up and down to get the guys he's wanted. And I think that's the big thing first is 15 of the 22 starters for the Eagles are homegrown. They're all drafted, right? You make trades like that to get the guys you want, plus you trade a first-round pick for A.J. Brown, which to this day people in Tennessee are baffled about for sure. And it just feels like he's constantly right. And I don't know that I've ever seen a GM in a single offseason like he did last year attack on a good team. We have to remember, for as much as this Philly team was under fire and Nick Sirianni was under fire, they went, 11-6 last year and still made the postseason. And they broke down. They lost 6 of the last 7 games, but the weaknesses were very clear. One, and we'll get into one of them, he had to replace both coordinators, him and Sirianni did, right? Because it was a mess last year after losing Steichen and Gannon after the other Super Bowl run. Eagles running backs, despite a great offensive line in front of them, were second to last in rushing grade last season. DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell and everything. So they go, we'll just get Saquon Barkley. That'll solve that. Yeah, it sure did. Linebackers, 18th in overall grade last year. They get Zach Bond, who was PFF's breakout player of the year, the best linebacker in football this year. And even Oren Burks, who came up big when Nakobe Dean got hurt in the playoffs. Just kind of even a depth signing making a huge impact. Linebackers, first in the NFL this year in overall grade. Secondary, last year, they're 28th in coverage grade. They're dead last in slot grade, like I mentioned earlier. They go get C.J. Gardner-Johnson back after a year away in Detroit, and they go draft Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, and there's some people going, why would you take 2 corners with your first 2 picks? Because, one to play inside and one to play outside because we were horrible in the slot last year and we couldn't cover a soul, and they're first in the NFL. Think about all the things I just said. They went from 31st to first in rushing grade. They went from 28th to first in coverage grade. They went from 18th to first in linebacker grade. And they had to replace Jason Kelce. And like you mentioned, the plan was always to move Cam Jurgens inside to replace him directly at center. But then they still needed a right guard on a team with not a ton of cap space. And they take a guy in Mekhi Becton who's never played a snap at guard in his life, not at Louisville, not with the Jets. Move him inside. He's a top 20 guard in football. It's just every single move he made last offseason was A+, and that's really the biggest reason. This is the Super Bowl of Howie Roseman. more than anything else between the drafting, the just wizardry of trading that turned Carson Wentz into darn near 4 all-pro players, right? And just last offseason, you couldn't do any better as a playoff team already, despite the way it finished, of attacking your weaknesses. I don't know that I've seen in one offseason a GM attack every single weakness on a team better than Howie Roseman did this past year.
And listen, there are some moves that Howie Roseman makes that you know immediately, because everyone talks about saying, oh, Howie Roseman did it again, right? Signing Saquon Barkley, trading for A.J. Brown. We all knew it was like, oh, we knew it was going to work out beautifully. Then there are moves that Howie Roseman makes that are very criticized, drafting Jalen Hurts in the second round. And this one obviously wasn't as criticized, but he took a shot on a player. He took a shot on a rugby player in the 7th round of an NFL draft. Turns out to be the best tackle in football in Jordan Mailata. Right? Yes, there are moves he makes that are like obvious, like, okay, that's going to work, obviously. Then there are ones that he makes that are like, I don't know if that's going to work. Like, what are you doing with this one? It turns out to work beautifully. He gets Super Bowl MVP and Jalen Hurts after drafting him in the second round, and his original starter, ironically, Carson Wentz, is on the other sideline in the Super Bowl in this one. And then Jordan Mailata drafting a rugby player in the 7th round who has no football experience, and he turns out to be arguably the best left tackle in football right now. So there are moves that he makes that are obvious and they work out beautifully, and there are moves that he makes that aren't as obvious and they also work out beautifully. He is, without a doubt, without a shred of a doubt, he is the best general manager in football right now.
There are 2 parts when they talk, obviously they talk about a general manager managing the football team, but his primary job is to manage talent, okay? And there's 2 parts of managing talent. Talent acquisition, which we just went over, obviously, right? And then there's talent development. You just mentioned, you turned a rugby player into an all-pro left tackle. You turned a second-round quarterback and replacing your previous franchise quarterback into a Super Bowl winner, right? I think about even a guy like Cam Jurgens, right? They drafted him not knowing when Jason Kelce was going to retire, but they go, well, we'll develop this guy and he'll be the plan and he'll play guard for now and learn the schemes and play alongside Kelce, right? There's always a plan. There's always a development plan. You think about a Cooper DeJean. Well, we just drafted Quinyon. What are we going to do? We'll just put him inside and we'll teach him how to play inside. Vic Fangio, I'm sure, had a hand in that. You know, Zach Bond, even think about, he didn't get a real shot in New Orleans to actually just play linebacker, right? Kind of drafted as this weird hybrid edge player sort of thing.
He was homeless there.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, because he hadn't played the position full-time like that, and the Saints were still using him off the edge. And even developing Bond into what he's become this quickly, and even Nakobe Dean alongside of him, it's acquisition of talent to fill the holes on the roster. It's development in talent, within your roster to sustain this level of success. It's right now the perfect operation when you have those 2 things going, because there are teams who can find talent, say top-end talent, first-round picks, big money free agents, but to be able to take all those guys, and we're talking Milton Williams, a 3rd-round pick. You mentioned Mailata in the 7th. It's all the way through, and you can see there's more kids coming. I mean, you mentioned Jalix Hunt and even a Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who we didn't see a whole lot this year because of other breakouts, and Nakobe Dean was a 3rd-round pick with injury concerns, or 4th-round pick. It's just they have the entire operation from top to bottom set up for everybody in the organization to succeed.
And a big part of it, and this is what great teams do, they never have glaring needs because they always have somebody behind the starter. And they go, listen, if this guy leaves or if Jason Kelce retires, we have a plan afterwards. There are so many teams in NFL and sports that they go, well, let's ride it out with this guy, and when he leaves, we got to figure out right after that. No, you figure it out during it. You figure it out, hey, Carson Wentz might not be the guy for us anymore. We got to figure out why we have Carson Wentz. Let's get the next guy in there that got Jalen Hurts, and you just won a Super Bowl for them, right? So there are so many things that Howie Roseman does that just make sure, hey, let's make sure we never have a glaring hole on this roster, because, Dalton, when you don't have a glaring hole on a roster, guess what you don't have to do? You don't have to reach for a player in the NFL draft, and you could have talented football players because everyone else is reaching. You have guys like Jalen Carter fall into your lap. You have guys that fall into your lap, like Cooper DeJean fall into your lap. You're able to draft good football players, and you could draft off of best player available instead of drafting what you need on a football team when you don't have any needs on the team. So I think that's another thing too, is that he's done such an amazing job of always thinking long term, right? We're going to need long term. What are we going to need 3 years from now? Forget what we need right now. What are we going to need 3 years from now? Let's address that now. I mean, they've had so many guys on the offensive line, shuffle in and out. They've had some mainstays, right? Like Lane Johnson's been there forever, but they have a lot of guys shuffle in and out on the offensive line, but they always have the next guy up. That's another big reason why Philadelphia is always kind of in the mix right now.
And you look at the way this team is structured going into next year. There's only 4 relatively important free agents here. It's Mekhi Becton is the only one on the offensive side, and then it's Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, and Zach Bond. And we'll see maybe which one or two of those guys they can prioritize and keep around. But when you only have 4 free agents out of a starting 22 on what is clearly the best team in football, and they proved it last night, you're set up for another run.
Yeah.
You really are, as long as you execute and you don't have too many injuries. But you mentioned even the depth in season when you have that level of depth. Let's say Milton Williams goes. Well, I still have Jordan Davis. I still have Moro Ajomo, the former 7th-round pick who's been coming on late this season. He played a really good game last night, too, in a part-time role. That's the part, is when you can develop guys in those part-time roles. Then they get to full-time roles, and you go, okay, they can handle it, right, for 50, 60 snaps a game. So there's like you mentioned, there's always a plan, and they're not losing very much from this team, if anything at all. I mean, one or two of those guys going to go get big money, and, I think we'll be talking about the very few needs that they do have in draft season and free agency, but they're as well stacked to do this again next year as anybody we've seen recently.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can come one today.